Hello and welcome to Video Game Retrospective. On today's episode, we're going to be looking at the history of the Sega Game Gear, Sega's attempt to defeat Nintendo's Game Boy. So the story of the Game Gear is impossible to tell without also talking about Nintendo's Game Boy, which will be coming up a lot in this episode. Now, an episode on the Game Boy is something I'd definitely like to do in the future, so I'll keep it brief in this one. As the successor to their Game & Watch line of handheld printed LCD games, Nintendo developed the Game Boy under lead designer and legendary design figure Gunpei Yokoi. This new system would continue the Game & Watch concept of simple gaming on the go, but with a major difference. Rather than have a dedicated system with a printed LCD for each individual game, the Game Boy would use an addressable and customizable dot matrix display combined with interchangeable game cartridges to play many different games on one system. Now, the Game Boy wasn't the first handheld game system with interchangeable cartridges. That would actually be the Milton Bradley Microvision, released a decade earlier. But it would be the first to achieve major mainstream success and a quality library of games with its 1989 release. Sega, flush with cash from the reasonable success of their first console, the Master System, and the major market success of their recently released 16-bit console, the Mega Drive, or Genesis, I'm American so I prefer Genesis, decided that if they had already successfully stolen Nintendo's thunder in the home console market, with an edgier, more powerful console, why not do the same with the handheld market? The system they created, the Game Gear, was a big, black behemoth. It would sacrifice precious battery life, and arguably portability, to make it the Rolls-Royce of 90s portable gaming. A luxury experience coming at a high premium over the Game Boy, but with some major benefits. The differences are night and day. This is what a Game Boy game looked like. And this is what Game Gear looked like. Add in a color screen that could even be used in the dark, and you can see why the Game Gear turned heads. While it wasn't the first or only color handheld game system on the market in the early 90s, there was also the Atari Lynx and the NEC Turbo Express, but with Sega being the up-and-coming video game company, it had the best chance at beating Nintendo. Sega's marketing for the Game Gear kept their edgy, upfront comparison style. They focused heavily on the color screen and the advanced graphics. Having Sonic games on the system at the height of Sonic Mania, no, not that one, helped as well. The Game Gear was envisioned as a portable version of Sega's previous generation home console, the Master System, and it kind of is. It uses the same Zilog Z80 processor as the Master System, though it runs slightly slower at 3.5 MHz versus 4 MHz. It also uses the same RAM configuration, with 8 KB of RAM and 16 KB of video RAM. It also uses the same Texas Instruments SN76489 sound chip as the Master System. Altogether, the Game Gear is essentially a portable Master System with a lower resolution and a few nice updates like stereo sound support and a much larger color palette. The Game Gear isn't directly compatible with the Master System, but porting games between the two was trivial. This was beneficial for both systems, as many early Game Gear titles were Master System ports, and some of the last worldwide releases for the Master System were ports from the Game Gear. It was fairly easy for Sega to take their new 16-bit flagship games and make 8-bit demakes of them that would be published on both the Game Gear and the Master System, which is not surprising since it was the easiest way for Sega to support the system, since they were kind of really stretched thin in the 90s. At just one point, Sega was offering legacy support for the Master System, supporting the Game Gear, Genesis, Sega CD, and 32X with software releases, and were developing the Saturn. That's not even mentioning all the cancelled systems or niche products like the Sega Pico. Unfortunately, that does mean that Sega's output for the Game Gear was a little lacking. Even worse, the Game Gear had poor third-party support. This was due to a lack of interest from third parties who didn't have a massive library of Master System games to port over, and many publishers having exclusive deals for handheld game development with Nintendo. Because of these issues, the Game Gear's total library is around 300 games. In comparison, the Game Boy had well over 1,000 releases. The biggest consequence of Sega's thrifty recycling of games is that the Game Gear game library has a serious lack of unique identity. There are very few experiences only available on the Game Gear. It feels like the typical Sega library, just on a handheld, which, granted, was impressive for the time, but makes the Game Gear feel redundant for modern collectors. As a positive, the Game Gear is region-free, so you can easily play the many Japanese-only titles. Sure, the library is small, but one area of strength for the Game Gear was accessories. You have the typical accessories a handheld needs, a link cable, rechargeable battery packs, etc., but also some really interesting ones. My two favorite are the TV tuner, which let you turn the Game Gear into a wireless television, back when analog TV signals still existed, and the Master Gear Converter, which let you actually play Master System games on your Game Gear. Now we need to discuss a big question. Was the Game Gear a success? Well, when you compare it to the Game Boy, absolutely not. The Game Boy outsold the Game Gear 10-1. Although the Game Gear didn't really strain sales of the Game Boy, it is worth noting that it was the biggest challenge to Nintendo's handheld dominance till the release of the PSP in 2004. But if you compare the sales of the Game Gear to the other competition, it absolutely performed better. Its 10.5 million sales dwarf the 3 million of the Lynx and the 1.5 million of the Turbo Express. Here's one way to look at it. If you don't include Nintendo, the Game Gear is the third best-selling handheld video game console of all time, after the PlayStation Vita and the PSP. Still, if you do include Nintendo, then the Game Gear barely cracks the top 10. Interestingly, right in the middle of the Game Gear's life in 1995, Sega would release a second competing handheld console. This system, the Sega Nomad, was a portable Sega Genesis that directly played Genesis cartridges. You would think that the Nomad would succeed the Game Gear, but no. Sega stated from the beginning that they intended to sell both systems, believing that the market was big enough for them to coexist. The Nomad ended up being a very niche boutique system, with limited promotion and even more limited sales, but it remained on sale for several years. Sega made the decision to discontinue the Game Gear in 1997. A direct successor to the system was planned, but nothing ever materialized. In the end, the Game Gear had a 7-year run, leaving a decent software library and a small but hardcore fan base. Except, and this is quite odd, the Game Gear was revived 3 years later by the company Majesco, under license from Sega, as an extreme budget console retailing for just $30. This model features a shell with muted colors, a higher quality screen, and slightly improved battery life. It sold quite poorly and is now decently rare. And then, in 2020, Sega released the Game Gear Micro, a Japanese-only device available in multiple colors with 4 built-in games. It's extremely tiny, like really tiny. It's the type of thing that really isn't designed to be played, just bought to sit on a shelf as a collector's item. It's very gimmicky, and I'd only recommend it to extreme Game Gear fans. I've been a fan of the Game Gear for quite a while. My first experiences with it weren't with the original hardware, but with Game Gear emulation in Sonic the Hedgehog compilations for 6th generation consoles. I then spent many years emulating Game Gear games on PC that I totally legally owned. I swear. I bought my first real Game Gear in around 2017. It worked great, and I had some good fun playing games with it for a while. Then I got distracted by other things and put it away in a box until a few weeks ago when I dug it out while writing this episode. And when we were shooting some nice pretty shots of it for this video, we discovered it's broken. That image does not look right at all. It's super dim with strange scan lines abound. You see, one of the unfortunate things with being a retro video game collector is that some devices just don't stand the test of time very well. The Game Gear is one of them. So we decided to buy a second Game Gear on eBay. This one coming with some extra goodies like an AC adapter and a nice travel bag. I was excited to try out some of the games that came with it too. But sadly, that system also doesn't work. It won't even display an image, just a black screen. The Game Gear is known for having poor quality capacitors that don't survive long term. I would say that the vast majority of Game Gears still out there today no longer work. That doesn't stop the Game Gear fanbase though. Due to its issues, the Game Gear now has one of the most extensive selections of replacement parts and mods available for any retro game system. There are plenty of ways to turn your old, broken Game Gear into something new entirely. From replacing the screen with a beautiful modern LCD, to recapping all of the system's sketchy capacitors, to even installing a modern lithium rechargeable battery. Fans are devoted to keeping their Game Gears alive, and that should show you just how special this niche little handheld is. Sure, it wasn't the most successful system ever, and its library is only okay, but it feels special. It has a great design with comfy buttons and a fairly large color backlit screen, with all your favorite characters like Sonic and Pac-Man. We wouldn't see a truly successful system that hits all of those qualifications again until a decade later with the Game Boy Advance SP and the PSP. The Game Gear is worth remembering and preserving, warts and all. And now for the ratings. Rarity, 2 out of 5. You should have no problem finding any number of nice Game Gear lots on eBay, but they are less common to see at your local game store. Price, 4 out of 5. Game Gear consoles remain fairly cheap if you're willing to risk buying a non-refurbished system. And the absolute best thing about the Game Gear is that Game Gear games remain extremely cheap. If you want a retro console you can collect for dirt cheap, look no further. Aesthetics, 4 out of 5. It looks like a Genesis controller. Nice, early 90s rounded black plastic with a nice splash of color. Unfortunately though, almost all Game Gears you find are going to feature a very scratched up screen since it uses a very soft protective plastic, but replacing that is super easy. Games, 3 out of 5. The game library for the Game Gear lies somewhere between being a better Master System than the Master System and being a Diet Genesis. Most games are pretty decent, but there are very few must-play titles you can't get somewhere else. Convenience, 1 out of 5. Old malfunctioning capacitors are the bane of the Game Gear fan, and the screen itself tends to degrade over time. If you want to have a legitimately good time with the Game Gear, you'll likely want to get it recapped and get a McWill LCD kit for a better screen, and maybe install rechargeable batteries. That's a lot. Alternatively, just go emulate your Game Gear games on a PC, or buy some on the 3DS. Thanks for watching this episode of Video Game Retrospective. If you would like to see more episodes covering the history of various video game consoles, then make sure to watch more of our videos. Duh, easy. And if you'd like to, you can go and join our Discord or support us on Patreon. Links in the description below. And I'll see you guys next time.